My Aunt Helen died in her sleep on a Sunday afternoon, which felt fitting for her. Quiet, orderly, the kind of death no one argues with. She'd never married, never had kids, and somehow still managed to be the gravitational center of every family gathering. Holidays were at her house. Recipes were hers, traditions too. So when the lawyer said she'd left the family recipe book to me, no one questioned it. I cook. I remember things. I'm the one who still asks where stories came from. The book was older than I expected. Leather-bound, cracked at the spine, pages warped from steam and time. It smelled like nutmeg and dust. Handwritten recipes filled every page in my aunt's neat, slanted script. No measurements at first glance, just instructions, assumptions. You'll know when it's right. I flipped through it that night, smiling at familiar names. Sunday, pot roast, apple bread fall, chicken and dumplings. Then I noticed the dates. They were written in the top right corner of every recipe. Not the dates the dishes were created, those I knew from memory. These were newer, always formatted the same way. G, D, G, G, G. Y. I frowned and checked one I recognized. Beef. Stew 11, G06, She, 1994. That date made my stomach tighten. I was 8 years old then. That was the year my cousin Mark disappeared. I told myself it was coincidence. Families reuse dates. Memory plays tricks. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I flipped faster. Lemon pound cake 08-14-22. That was the summer Mrs. Calder vanished walking her dog. Everyone said she must have wandered into the woods. No body, no closure. Venison chili 01-22, 1981, my grandfather's brother. Gone after a hunting trip. Never came home. My hands started shaking. Every date matched a disappearance. Not deaths, not funerals. People who were never found. I dropped the book on the table like it might bite me. My Aunt Helen had fed us these dishes for decades. Comfort food, celebration food. Food that showed up right after bad news, right after searches were called off, right after people stopped asking questions. I picked the book back up, heart pounding, and turned to the very first recipe. Simple white bread 0309, 1957. Below it, in smaller writing I hadn't noticed before, was a single sentence. Do not cook before the date has passed. I checked the calendar on my phone. Tomorrow was March 9th. And I suddenly understood why Aunt Helen had always insisted on hosting dinner. I didn't sleep that night. The recipe book sat on the kitchen table, closed but present, like it was listening. I kept thinking about that line. Do not cook before the date has passed, and the way Aunt Helen used to say things like that. Calm, certain, as if timing itself were an ingredient. At 12:01 a.m., March 9th officially began. Nothing happened. No sirens, no knocks at the door. The world didn't flinch. I almost laughed from the relief of it. Almost convinced myself I'd spun an entire conspiracy out of grief and coincidence. Then I remembered something small and awful. Aunt Helen never cooked the dishes on the dates. She cooked them the night before, so they'd be ready, so they'd rest, so they'd be served the next day when everyone was already tired and raw and searching for comfort. My throat tightened. I opened the book again and read the bread recipe more carefully. It wasn't written like the others, where most recipes were warm, forgiving, full of margin notes and substitutions. This one was precise. Mix thoroughly, cover completely, leave in a warm place overnight. And then, underlined twice, do not open the oven while rising. I glanced at my own oven. The light inside flicked on. I hadn't touched it. The door was closed, but I could hear something faint from inside. Not a sound exactly, more like pressure. Like dough expanding against something that wasn't meant to stretch. I backed away slowly. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder I didn't remember setting. Bread! Tonight! I canceled it with shaking fingers. The oven light went out. The house settled. Quiet again. I stood there for a long time, heart hammering, thinking about all those meals, all those gatherings where people cried into stew, into cake, into bread still warm from the oven. How full we'd all felt afterward. How the searching always stopped soon after. At dawn, I made a decision. I wouldn't cook the bread. I'd break the chain. Morning light crept through the windows. The clock ticked toward noon. I kept the book closed, my hands nowhere near the kitchen. At 11:43 a.m., the power went out. Not the whole neighborhood, just my house. I could see lights on across the street. I checked the breaker. Everything was fine. From the kitchen came a soft, patient knock. Not on the door. From inside the oven, 3 slow taps, like someone reminding me I'd forgotten a step. And with sick clarity, I realized something Aunt Helen must have known all along. The recipes didn't mark disappearances, they scheduled them, and if I refused to cook, then whatever was meant to be fed tonight would come looking for a different kitchen. I didn't answer the knocking. I stood frozen in the hallway, every instinct screaming at me to run, to grab my keys and get out of the house before whatever was in the oven decided politeness was optional. The taps came again, same rhythm, same restraint, and Helen's rhythm. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. She used to do that on the pantry door when she needed help carrying something. Always said it was rude to bang. No, I whispered, to the oven, to the book, to the weight of generations that had apparently decided my kitchen was next in line. I'm not doing it. The knocking stopped. For a moment, I thought that was it. That defiance had worked. My knees nearly buckled with relief. Then the smell started. Fresh bread, warm yeast, butter. That unmistakable, comforting scent that bypasses logic and goes straight for memory. Sunday afternoons, family crowded around the table. Aunt Helen pressing an extra slice into my hand, saying, "You're too thin. Eat." My mouth watered despite myself. I hated that. Hated how easily my body responded, how deeply this thing understood us. I stepped into the kitchen before I realized I was moving. The oven door was still closed. Cold to the touch. No heat, no light. The smell was coming from the book. I stared at it, pulse roaring in my ears. The leather cover had shifted, just slightly, like it had been opened and closed again. I hadn't touched it since dawn, I was sure of that. I opened it now with trembling hands. The bread recipe was no longer the first page. It had moved. In its place was a new recipe, written in the same careful hand. Hearty vegetable soup, 0309 SO 2025 today. My name was written beneath it, not as the author, as an ingredient. The letters swam as tears filled my eyes. I flipped the page back, frantic, hoping this was a trick of exhaustion, of grief. Every recipe had changed. Each one now listed a date and a name. Neighbors, coworkers, people I recognized from town. Some crossed out in faded ink, some circled. Some annotated with notes like, "Fed generously" or "Portion shared." At the very back of the book, where blank pages should have been, was a final section I'd never seen before. Substitutions. Handwritten, cramped, desperate. If primary is unavailable, use nearest relation. If relation refuses, use host. Hunger must be met. My phone rang. I jumped so hard I nearly dropped the book. "Mom," I answered with shaking hands. "Hi." Her voice sounded tired, relieved. "Honey, I just wanted to check in. You didn't come by yesterday." I swallowed. "I'm okay." There was a pause. Then, softly, "Are you cooking tonight?" The question landed like a blade. Why?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Because," she said carefully, "people are starting to ask where you are." I looked back at the book. At my name, written where measurements should have been. At the oven, silent now, waiting. And I understood the final cruelty of Aunt Helen's inheritance. The recipes didn't just feed on loss. They taught families how to offer it willingly. How to dress disappearance in comfort, how to turn refusal into substitution, and how to make sure the table was never empty. I closed the book and held it to my chest, heart pounding. If I burned it, something would starve. If I cooked from it, someone would vanish. And if I did nothing, dinner was still coming. I hung up on my mom without explaining. I couldn't risk hearing that tone again. The one that wasn't quite concern and wasn't quite expectation, but something trained into her the same way it had been trained into me. The oven knocked once. Not a reminder this time, a warning. I backed into the living room, clutching the book like it weighed 100 pounds. My hands were slick with sweat. Every option felt wrong, but one thing was suddenly clear. This wasn't just my choice. It never had been. This book had survived because it didn't belong to one person. It belonged to the family, to the town, to anyone willing to trade silence for warmth. I flipped back to the substitution section, forcing myself to read every line. If primary is unavailable, use nearest relation. If relation refuses, use host. If host refuses, portion may be divided. My stomach turned. I imagined what that works out to in practice. Accidents that never quite kill you, people who move away, pieces taken thin enough that no one, disappearance ever feels big enough to grieve. Another line, written darker than the rest, if no one cooks, the hunger chooses. The house creaked, settling in a way it never had before. The smell of bread faded, replaced by something sharper, metallic, expectant. I realized then that Aunt Helen hadn't been a monster, she'd been a buffer. She cooked so no one else had to decide. She hosted so the cost stayed contained. Every meal she served was a controlled burn, one loss at a time, on a schedule, with enough comfort to keep people from looking too closely. And now she was gone. The book wasn't angry with me, it was hungry, and I was the only thing standing between it and improvisation. I walked back into the kitchen and set the recipe book on the counter, hands shaking but steady enough to act. The oven was quiet now, listening. "I won't feed you people," I said aloud. The air thickened, like I'd said something very funny. "But I won't let you pick randomly either." I reached for the sink, turned on the water, and tore a blank page from the back of the book. The paper resisted, fibers screaming softly as it came loose, like it knew it wasn't meant to be removed. I dipped the page into the water until the ink ran, names bleeding together into dark, meaningless smears. The oven rattled violently. I slammed the soggy page onto the stovetop and struck a match. Flame caught fast. The smell was awful, not burning paper, but burning food. Sweet and wrong, like sugar caramelizing on flesh. The oven screamed, not a sound pressure. Heat blasting outward, blowing the oven door open so hard it dented the cabinet. Inside there was no rack, no pan, just darkness, deep, waiting. I backed away, coughing, eyes burning. The book slammed shut on its own. New writing carved itself into the cover, letters pressing out from beneath the leather like bruises. H-O, stew, own, cooperative. Escalation required somewhere in town. A siren wailed, "Not police, search and rescue." And I knew, with terrible certainty, that by refusing to cook, I hadn't stopped dinner. I just forced it to be served cold to whoever was closest and least prepare. I ran, not far, just out onto the porch, lungs burning, the night air hitting my face like a slap. Across the street, lights flicked on in one house, then another. Doors opened. People stepped outside in robes and slippers, murmuring to each other, phones already in hand. The siren grew louder. Search and rescue vehicles don't usually roll through town at dinner time. I clutched the recipe book to my chest and scanned the street, dread pooling low in my stomach. This was the book's leverage. It didn't need secrecy. It needed urgency. Confusion. Enough fear that someone, anyone, would decide it was better to give than to let it take. A neighbor, Mrs. Calder's daughter, I realized dimly, ran past my house toward her car, crying into her phone. "He was just in the yard," she sobbed. I turned my back for 1 minute. The words hit me like a punch. The hunger had chosen. I staggered back inside and slammed the door, heart hammering. The oven was quiet again, sated for the moment. The smell in the kitchen had changed, less metallic now, more like soup simmering somewhere out of sight. I opened the book with shaking hands. The hearty vegetable soup recipe was gone. In its place was a new entry, Late Supper 03-09, 2025. Below the date was a single line, written smaller than the rest. Portion accepted. No name, no measurements. Just a note in the margin, in Aunt Helen's careful script, "Do not wait too long between meals." My phone buzzed with a town-wide alert. Missing person. Jacob Calder, age 6, last seen at 6:48 p.m. I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages. The substitution section had updated 2 new ink, fresh and dark. Random selection increases distress. Distress intensifies flavor. I felt sick. That was the point. This thing didn't just feed on loss, it fed on the way we lost people, on panic, on guilt, on families tearing themselves apart wondering what they'd done wrong. Cooking had been a kindness, a way to keep the damage narrow, predictable, quiet. Refusal made it sloppy. I sank to the kitchen floor, the book open in my lap, and finally let myself cry. Not for Aunt Helen, not even for the boy, for the truth no one had ever said out loud. This town had been surviving on sacrifice for generations, and we'd all agreed, silently, that forgetting was worth the cost. The oven knocked again. Once, polite, an invitation. I wiped my face and looked up, hollowed out but clear-eyed. "I see you," I whispered, "and I won't let you turn this into comfort." The book was warm now, almost hot. New text bled through the page, slow and deliberate. Next. Meal unassigned. Host required. The implications settled over me like ash. If I didn't cook, if I didn't burn the book, if I didn't leave town and let it hunt blind, then the only way to stop it choosing another child was to put myself on the menu. And for the first time since Aunt Helen died, I understood why she'd always looked so tired at the table. and why she'd never let anyone else help in the kitchen. I picked myself up off the floor and carried the book back to the counter. My hands were steady now, not because I wasn't afraid, but because the fear had finally settled into something solid. Understanding. Aunt Helen had lived with this weight so long it had bent her posture, thinned her smile. She'd chosen exhaustion over randomness, control over chaos. I opened to a clean page and took a pen from the drawer. The book resisted. The paper felt thicker here, almost leathery, like skin that didn't want to be marked. I pressed harder. At the top of the page, I wrote the date, 03/09/2025. Below it, I wrote the name it had already tried to take, M.E. The oven went silent, not waiting, listening. I turned the page and began to write a recipe. Not one from memory, not one I'd ever cooked before. I wrote it the way the book liked. Calm, certain, like this was how things were done. Simple meal serves one, prepare alone, no substitutions, no portions shared, no guests. My chest tightened as I wrote the final instruction. Do not pass this on. The book shuddered under my hands. Heat flooded the kitchen. Not burning, not violent, just oppressive, like a room packed too full of bodies. The smell returned, stronger now, layered with everything that had ever been cooked from these pages. Bread, stew, cake, all of it pressing in at once. The oven door creaked open by itself. Inside wasn't darkness anymore. It was a table, long, wooden, familiar. I recognized the scratches on its surface, the notch on the corner from when I was a kid and ran into it too hard. Chairs were set neatly around it, plates laid out with care. Every seat was empty, except the one at the head. Aunt Helen's chair. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I set the book down gently, like she would have, and stepped toward the oven. The heat wrapped around me, heavy and final. Behind me, somewhere in town, the sirens cut off abruptly. Silence followed. The book's pages fluttered once, then stilled. As I crossed the threshold, I felt the thing hesitate, not confused, but surprised. This wasn't how meals usually ended. No comfort afterward, no leftovers, no one to teach the next generation how to cook around the loss. Good! If this was the price of ending the inheritance, of breaking the quiet agreement, of making sure the hunger never learned another name, then I would pay it myself. And as the oven door closed behind me, sealing the kitchen in ordinary darkness, I hoped the town would finally learn how to grieve without setting the table first. Death didn't come. That was the first surprise. The heat didn't burn. The table didn't pull me in. I stood there, inside the oven space, heart pounding, waiting for pain or darkness or something that would mean the bargain had been accepted. Instead, the chair at the head of the table scraped backward. Aunt Helen sat there, not whole, not alive, but present in the way memories are when you finally stop fighting them. She looked tired in the same way she always had near the end. Deeply. Bone deep. You weren't supposed to do that, she said gently. I know, I replied. My voice echoed strangely, like it belonged to someone further away. You weren't supposed to either. She sighed. The sound carried weight. I did what kept it contained. You fed it, I said. You taught it how? Her eyes flicked to the empty chairs. I taught it limits. The table trembled. The empty plates rattled, impatient. You think it ends because you volunteered? She asked. It doesn't end. It learns. I didn't volunteer, I said. I closed the recipe. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pen, the same one I'd used to write my name. I hadn't realized I'd kept hold of it. The ink was gone now, bled dry, useless. I wrote, no substitutions, I continued. You know what that means. Her expression changed then. Not fear, recognition. The hunger shifted, pressure tightening like something testing a boundary it had never encountered before. The table warped, the chairs creaked. You made yourself inedible, Aunt Helen whispered. I made myself singular, I said. No portions, no passing it on. No teaching someone else how to survive by sacrificing quietly. The oven space shuddered violently. The smell of food spoiled, souring into rot. The book! The book slid across the table on its own, leather cover cracking as if under strain. Aunt Helen looked at it, then back at me. You understand what happens now, she said softly. Yes, I replied. The hunger recoiled, not retreating, not gone, but suddenly unhoused. It couldn't digest me, couldn't divide me, couldn't translate my choice into tradition. Without a recipe, it had no structure. The table began to dissolve, edges blurring like steam. The chairs collapsed inward, wood folding into nothing. Aunt Helen faded with them, her last look not angry or sad, but relieved. "Let them feel it," she said, "even if they hate you for it." The oven door opened. I stumbled forward, collapsing onto my kitchen floor as cold air rushed in. The heat vanished instantly, like it had never been there. The oven was just an oven again, empty, dark, ordinary. The recipe book lay on the counter. Its pages were blank, all of them. Outside, voices rose in confusion. Doors opened. People called names that would never again be answered by comfort food and full plates. I lay there shaking, alive, empty, and unprotected. But the hunger had nothing to read anymore, no instructions, no inheritance, no dates to circle. And for the first time in generations, when someone disappeared in this town, there would be nothing warm on the table to soften it. Only grief, unseasoned, unserved, and finally, honest. I stayed on the kitchen floor until dawn. The house felt different without the book's hum under everything. Quieter but not calmer, like a room after an argument where no one's pretending anymore. I could hear people outside now, voices carrying through open windows, confusion bleeding into anger. Someone knocked on my door, hard. I didn't answer. I watched the light creep across the tiles and thought about what Aunt Helen had said. Let them feel it. She'd been right about one thing. The town didn't know how. Not without soup or cake or bread to give shape to the loss. Grief here had always come with napkins and seconds. By mid-morning, the knocking turned into shouting. I finally opened the door to find 3 neighbors on my porch. Faces pale, eyes red. Mrs. Calder's daughter was there, arms wrapped around herself, shaking. "Do you know something?" she demanded. Not accusing. Desperate. "Everyone keeps saying you were involved." The word hung there. Involved. Like this was a potluck gone wrong instead of a child missing. "I know why it kept happening," I said quietly. They stared at me. I looked past them, down the street, where people were gathering in small, uncertain clusters. No casseroles, no folding tables, just hands empty and unsure. "There isn't a recipe," I continued. "Not anymore." That's when the first person screamed, not in fear, in realization. A man further down the street dropped to his knees, sobbing. Someone else shouted a name over and over like volume alone might bring it back. The sound rippled outward, contagious and uncontrolled. This was what the hunger had protected them from. This was what Aunt Helen had been absorbing, meal by meal. Mrs. Calder's daughter looked at me again, and something ugly flickered across her face. "You let this happen," she said. "No," I replied. "I stopped pretending it didn't. She slapped me, hard." I didn't move. I didn't defend myself. I took it because this was the first honest exchange our town had had in decades. More people gathered. Accusations flew. Someone called the police. Someone else tried to drag me off the porch before being stopped. I saw it then, clear as day. The hunger wasn't gone. It had just been replaced. By rage, by blame, by the desperate need to put the weight somewhere. I raised my voice, not shouting, just loud enough to cut through. "It's not coming back," I said. "No one can cook it away anymore. If you want answers, you'll have to sit with the not knowing." They didn't want that. They wanted a table, a host, a way to survive without changing. I closed the door on the noise and leaned against it, heart pounding. I don't know what will happen to me now. Whether I'll be run out of town, or worse, made into a different kind of sacrifice. But as the day wore on and no new sirens sounded, as no new names were whispered with relief instead of terror, I knew one thing was already true. The hunger would never be fed again. And that meant every loss from now on would be visible, heavy, shared. Which is exactly what terrifies people enough to finally stop passing the dish. The first night without a meal was the hardest. By sunset, the town felt brittle. People stayed inside, not out of fear of the dark, but because there was nothing to do with it. No casseroles appeared. No lights gathered around one house. Grief had nowhere to go, so it pressed outward, leaking into everything. I watched it from my window. Searchlights cut slow arcs across the woods for Jacob Calder. Volunteers moved in uneven lines, calling his name until their voices cracked. No one brought food. No one suggested a break. They just kept walking, hollow-eyed and stubborn, because stopping no longer came with permission. That was new. Around 10 p.m., my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was my mother. Her voice was shaking. "People are saying you destroyed something," she whispered. "Something that kept us safe." I closed my eyes. It kept us quiet. Silence stretched on the line. I could hear her breathing, fast and uneven. "Your aunt saved people," she said finally. Yes, I replied. By choosing who didn't get saved, she hung up without another word. Later, someone left a box on my porch. No note, just food, cold sandwiches, store-bought cookies, untouched. An instinct, not a tradition. People didn't know what else to do yet, so they defaulted to habit. I didn't eat it. Near midnight, I heard a sound I'd never heard in this town before. Not sirens, a bell. The old one at the volunteer firehouse rung by hand when something was wrong, but no one knew what kind of wrong it was yet. The sound carried, heavy and uneven. I felt it then, a stirring, not hunger, not pressure, absence. The thing that had fed on structure and permission wasn't raging. It wasn't lashing out. It was dissolving. Without recipes, without dates, without willing hands to translate loss into ritual, it had nothing to anchor itself to. No language, no schedule, no way to teach itself forward. That didn't bring Jacob back. Nothing ever would. But at 2013 a.m., someone screamed his name and didn't stop screaming when no answer came. Others joined in. Not searching. Grieving. Out loud. I sank down against the wall and cried with them, the sound of it rising and falling through the night like something ancient and unfinished. And in that moment, I understood the final truth Aunt Helen had never written down. The hunger hadn't been ancient. It had been trained, fed by our need to survive grief without changing. And now, starving, it was being replaced by something harder but infinitely more human. The ability to sit together without comfort food, without substitutions, and without pretending that loss can ever be made polite. Tomorrow, they might come for me again. They might decide I'm easier to lose than the thing I took away. But tonight, for the first time in this town's history, no one disappeared quietly. And that, I realized, was the beginning of the end. By morning, the town had changed its posture. Not healed, not calmer, just upright in a way it hadn't been before. Like someone who's been hunched for years finally stood straight and felt every ache at once. Jacob was found just after sunrise. Alive. Cold, dehydrated, wedged in a drainage culvert less than half a mile from his house. He'd been there all night, crying until his voice gave out, then sitting in the dark listening to people shout his name without knowing how close they were. They said later that if the soup had been cooked, if the night had gone the way it always did, searchers would have stopped earlier, taken breaks, gone home to eat, let the grief soften into something manageable. Instead, they kept going. Because there was nothing warm waiting for them. The news spread fast. Relief crashed through the town like a shockwave, followed immediately by something more complicated: confusion, guilt, anger looking for somewhere to land. By noon, two things were true at the same time. People were grateful Jacob was alive. People were furious that the old way was gone. I became the easiest place to put that fury. Someone spray-painted "feeder" on my garage door. Someone else scratched it out and replaced it with "murder." A third person crossed both out and wrote, "Why so hard the siding splintered? I didn't clean it. Let it be seen." At the emergency town meeting that afternoon, they packed the gym until the bleachers groaned. No potluck tables along the walls, no coffee urns, just folding chairs and raw nerves. The mayor talked about unity, about tradition, about unintended consequences. Then someone shouted my name. They turned as one when I stood. I didn't bring the book. I didn't bring proof. I brought the truth they've been avoiding. "There was a thing here," I said, voice steady despite the roar in my ears. It fed on us choosing comfort over truth. It learned our habits, our kindness, our fear of sitting with loss. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Aunt Helen kept it contained," I continued. "She didn't create it, she managed it, and it cost her everything." Someone yelled, "You think you know better than her?" "No," I said. "I think she knew exactly how bad it was and how much worse it would get if it kept being taught." Silence fell, heavy and unfamiliar. I looked at their faces. People who'd eaten at my aunt's table, who'd cried into bread she'd baked, who'd never once asked why disappearance came with dessert. "You want something to blame?" I said quietly. "Blame the part of us that thought loss could be scheduled. That believed if we followed the rules would protect our children." No one interrupted me this time. "Jacob lived," I finished, "because for once, no one stopped to eat." I sat down. They didn't applaud. They didn't forgive me. But they didn't drag me out either. That night, the graffiti stayed. The whispers didn't stop. But something else didn't happen for the first time in generations. No one cooked, and the silence that followed wasn't polite. It was real, heavy, shared. And as I lay awake listening to the town learn, slowly, painfully, how to grieve without a recipe, I knew the hunger was gone for good. Because it turns out, the one thing it could never survive was a community that finally refused to eat around its losses and chose instead to face them together. The weeks that followed were worse than the night itself. Not because anyone else vanished. No one did. That was the problem. Loss didn't come on a schedule anymore. Fear didn't arrive with instructions. People had to decide how to respond each time something went wrong, and that exhausted them in ways casseroles never had. The town fractured along familiar lines. Some people avoided me completely, crossing the street when they saw me coming. Others watched me like I might suddenly start taking notes, like I was the new thing they didn't understand yet. A few fewer than I expected brought me coffee or nodded quietly or said things like, "I don't know how to feel, but thank you." Those were the hardest conversations, because they weren't wrong to miss the old way. The hunger hadn't been cruelty dressed up as kindness. It had been relief. A structure that let people survive the unspeakable without changing themselves too much. Taking it away didn't make anyone braver, it just made everything heavier. I started noticing what replaced the recipes. People sat longer with each other. Searches went on until bodies gave out. Names were said more often out loud without the softening buffer of food. Grief stopped being private. It spilled into classrooms, into church services that ran too long, into grocery aisles where people cried in front of the cereal. Some nights, I wondered if Aunt Helen had been right, if containment, no matter the cost, was better than this slow, communal unraveling. Then I'd remember Jacob alive in his mother's arms, or I'd remember how many names in that book had never come back. One evening, as I walked past my aunt's old house, I saw something new. The lights were on. Not for a dinner, not for a gathering, just a few neighbors sitting around the table, empty-handed, talking. No plates, no serving dishes. Just coffee mugs and tired faces. They didn't invite me in. They didn't shut the door either, and I realized then that the archive the book had maintained, the quiet agreement to trade people for peace, was being replaced by something messier and slower. Practice. Practice at sitting with pain. Practice at not fixing it. Practice at staying present when nothing could be done. The hunger had taught us how to avoid grief. Now the town was learning, clumsily, painfully, how to live with it. That night, for the first time since Aunt Helen died, I dreamed of her again. She was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hands empty. And she wasn't tired anymore. The first anniversary came quietly. No sirens, no casseroles, no extra chairs pulled out like someone might need a place to sit down suddenly. Jacob rode his bike past my house that afternoon, waving with the reckless confidence of a kid who doesn't know how close he came to becoming a story people whispered over soup. His mother watched from the porch until he turned the corner, then kept watching long after. That's how it is now. People watch. They notice when someone doesn't come home on time. They ask questions sooner. They keep looking even when it hurts, and there's nothing warm waiting to reward them for stopping. No one ever found another recipe book. No one ever admitted they'd known more than they said. But sometimes, at the grocery store, someone will pause in front of the bread aisle and look unsettled, like they're remembering a comfort they don't quite trust anymore. The book itself never came back. I burned the blank pages in the backyard one evening, one by one. They didn't smell like food anymore, just paper. Ordinary, disappointing paper. When the last page turned to ash, nothing not. Nothing waited. That felt like the final proof. People still disappear sometimes. That part never stopped being true. But now, when it happens, the town gathers without pretending there's a correct way to absorb it. No dishes named after dates. No meals to make the loss go down easier. Just voices, exhaustion, anger, hope. Everything mixed together without instruction. Grief is louder now. So is love. And no one has ever again said, "At least we ate," like that meant something good. Sometimes I think about what Aunt Helen gave up, how many times she must have stood in her kitchen knowing exactly what she was doing, choosing a controlled loss over a chaotic one. I don't hate her for it. I understand her. But I'm glad she doesn't have to carry it anymore. The hunger is gone because it was never a creature to begin with. It was a habit. And habits only survive when people keep practicing them. We stopped. If you ever inherit something that explains your town a little too well, if comfort arrives suspiciously fast after tragedy, if grief is always served with instructions, ask yourself who benefits from the meal. Because once you learn how to sit together with empty hands, with nothing but the truth on the table, you'll find that some things only disappear when we finally stop feeding them.